Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Ignite podcast. Today I'm being joined by Priscilla Radice. Priscilla, welcome.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for inviting me on. It's great to have you doing this podcast. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far and look forward to continue it in the years to come. So, as a starting point, maybe let everyone know just a bit about you and your journey to date. What got you to where you are right now?
Okay. Well, I've had a fairly eclectic journey, if you want to use that word. I'm a sociologist that has worked in infrastructure for 25 years, so not normally a fit, not coming from an engineering background. I've worked in lots of different sectors. So I've worked in fashion merchandising for major department stores. I've owned my own kind of businesses. I've worked in retail. I've worked in tourism. And economic development for cities and placemaking. So all the way from the cruise industry to rail and ports and maritime.
Wow.
So lots of big projects for quite a long time. The types of roles that I've led were head of strategic projects for the Port of Brisbane when we were privatised, really looking at all of those new opportunities that were available to us as a private entity. So things like the business case for the new international cruise terminal, the Port Drive expansion, and of course the port connection, which stimulated things like inland rail. And back in Newcastle, when BHP closed, I worked instrumentally with a range of different players across the Hunter Valley economic development areas, introducing new tourism, service industries, helping to bring the university into the city centre. So really, how do we reactivate different economies? And here in Queensland, I used to be a principal at Arup, a global engineering firm, where I led the business strategy for Asia Pacific in transport and resources with a fantastic team. And we transformed our business model, grew the business considerably, and really kind of shifted our focus to be far more purpose-driven around our clients and what our clients were looking for, and that was really successful. I started my own company a couple of years ago called Contribute Consulting, and I provide advisory services across a range of different small and large clients, legal, engineering, medico, and as part of that, I'm also the CEO of the Infrastructure Association of Queensland. So that's the peak body that represents the industry as a whole. We're quite unusual in the fact that we're a very broad church. We're not just after construction or engineering or legal. We look after all the many different players across the many different sectors that make up infrastructure. And I also work a lot in the health sector doing assurance work and strategic advisory around how we look at the investment decisions around health and get the best outcomes out of that CapEx spend.
Holy Toledo. There you go.
And I'm a living mother of a 12-year-old boy who's just started high school, and so we've got the roller coaster ride of high school in our house, which is
yeah. So you don't get much, not much downtime then.
Well, as we were just discussing, you've got to carve out downtime, otherwise you can't be a good leader. So it's got to be a priority. So I do try and do that.
Yeah, good. Well, amazing. So there's so much there for us to explore in today's podcast. I think probably where I'd like to start is looking at, so curious about leadership, and I'm curious about your views on, where the industry is going this year and that kind of thing. So I do want to dive into that in terms of where you see things going this year and into the beyond. I kind of want to start, I know we caught up a couple of years ago and recorded a similar podcast for different reasons. And you talked a lot about your journey at Arup, and wouldn't mind starting there just in terms of your leadership role at Arup and, what your learnings were from a leadership point of view in terms of obviously that being quite a successful venture. Yeah, maybe tell us a bit about what you learnt in that role.
I learned that when you don't have a clear mandate for change, that it can be really difficult for people to accept that you are kind of on a change journey.
Yep.
And that when you are doing things on a large scale for change, and if you're not clear that it's a change journey, but you're talking about it as a continuous improvement kind of business journey, that you're not really being fair to people, that you have to fundamentally define how big it is and take people on that journey, and that my pace isn't necessarily the same pace as others. So as a leader, you've got to be able to slow down and bring people with you, or you've got to be able to find a way that you can help people pick up the pace. We had an amazing team, but there wasn't really strong alignment at the beginning for a little while in what we were trying to do. And you know, some of that comes down to communication. When you have a really strong culture and it's a really positive culture, but the business does need to change and adapt, you have to be really respectful of the culture that exists and how you are going to respect that culture in this new journey. So they're probably the biggest lessons for me, but getting a clear mandate at the beginning, because if you're very new to a company and you're very different in the profile of a company, it took me a little while to recognise that, you know, you're not necessarily seen as an agent for change in a positive light. Different people respond to change really differently. So it was a great journey for me in terms of both my technical skills for strategic thinking. I'd never worked for a big global firm before, so the size and scale, lots of great projects and opportunities. But what I did find across the consulting industry and working in IQ and working with lots of different companies now, size and scale, is that I find that there's a very common trend that everyone is billable and everybody's incredibly busy and everybody's in delivery mode and nobody is really focused on the business. And so if you don't have anyone actually looking after the strategic interests of those businesses and making those big decisions, especially in a massively changing environment and an accelerating environment, then you're not setting yourself up for success.
And I know you and I had a brief conversation about that before we hit record around, and I'm seeing that with all of my clients across the industry at the moment, is that strategic piece getting left behind because everyone's so busy and forgetting about, so there's plenty of work on. I find when there's heaps of work on, you can become a bit complacent about the future in terms of where things are going, and future proofing and future planning for the team, the business, that kind of thing, because you're just so busy delivering. And so I guess, what are your insights? Like, what are you, so for individuals who are in leadership roles, for business owners who are really struggling with carving out that time for strategic thinking, for strategic meetings, that kind of thing, like what are your recommendations? How are you going about it? How are you seeing people go about it in the industry at the moment?
Look, it's really hard. Like at the end of the day, I feel like, you know, I've started 2022 and it's just an extension of 2021. I know I'm tired, I'm stressed. I didn't get that carve out of time that I always do for Christmas. I only had a week off. We're all balancing this kind of new way of working, incredibly busy. Most people have really big family issues they're dealing with. They're dealing with sickness, they're dealing with COVID, other issues, aging parents. The mental health issues of people are spiraling, especially in young populations. And so we're all juggling and holding so much. So I think that it's perfectly normal that you're going to default to your normal business. We've been doing it this way for a long time. We just keep churning and burning, and you feel that you just have to keep getting bigger and bigger and doing more and more of the same. I just don't think that's sustainable either for individuals or for businesses. I see businesses having a lot of focus on people's individual capability, which is fantastic. Less businesses having a focus on their business capability as a whole. I think there's a gap there. But fundamentally, you have to sit down and work out what works for you. So how do you carve out that time? Where is the best time for you to think? Is it lying in the bathtub? Is it walking the dog? Is it having a swim at the pool? Is it going to the ocean? And you need to make that really clear to your team that I carve out this time and I turn off my emails and I turn off my phone and I am not available. And you should have empowered your team that if you're not available, that they can cope.
Yes.
that there should be, and that there's a way to contact you if it's a proper emergency, but most things aren't proper emergencies. But if you provide your team with what that structure is, your team actually will love you for having a rhythm where, she answers emails at this particular time. This is her rhythm. This is the time when she's picking up and dropping off the kids. Don't ring her unless you need to. She's only going to be annoyed. And don't hang around outside of your leader's toilet waiting to have a conversation with them, because that never goes down well either. But if you don't carve out the time, you're failing your team and you're setting an example. But it's incredibly hard. You've got to be really disciplined. And with any kind of new habit and new way of working, you need the support of your team around you. You need to articulate it. You need your leader's support to do it. So, quite often in our field, people come up through a really technical stream. They're very process orientated. And then they are asked to take these generalist positions with a wide range of other skills that are actually, they've never necessarily been trained in, they don't necessarily have. You have to take the time in each step of your career when it's expanding and growing and you have more responsibility. What are these new skills that I need to learn, and how am I going to look after myself and my team's health?
Yeah.
But it's not an easy task. I feel like I'm repeating all of those things that I always said consulting firms don't do well around carving out time and looking for that. And then as a freelancer, I've only been in this 2 years and I'm still saying yes to too many things and then finding myself stressed with work. So, there's it's an ongoing, we default to those behaviours of saying yes and taking on too much.
Yep.
And how you balance that, it's not easy.
It's interesting for me, and thank you so much for that download, because it's opened up a lot of thoughts for me, and kind of where I want to direct the conversation. It's like really that, for me anyway, it's that self-awareness piece, right? So, I've just come off today a group coaching session with a team at GHD. I do a lot of work with those kind of organisations, and we were talking about, these patterns of behaviour that don't serve us, and the self-awareness piece. And there's a particular gentleman who I've worked with for probably the past 3 years, and he's like, I thought I dealt with that pattern of behaviour 2 or 3 years ago in terms of it not serving me, but now that I've got really busy again, it's kind of rearing its head and it's coming up. And he's like, it's just this ongoing kind of process of peeling back the layers. I liken it to an onion. You peel back one layer and you go, that's cool, I've dealt with that, part of my personality or that non-serving thought or pattern of behaviour. But often in times of stress and often in times of overwhelm, those things come up again to be dealt with and processed again. So what kind of work have you done, I guess I'm leaning towards a self-awareness piece, and what would you recommend people do to kind of get clearer on themselves, their priorities, their personality styles, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I've been on a big kind of journey for this myself. I have a personality that is quite binary. People either really love it and embrace it, or they really don't like it. And so, my dad used to say to me when I was a little girl, for a small person, you have a big impact. And so being conscious that not everyone sees that energy or that impact in a positive way. So being really understanding when you walk into a room as a leader, everyone is looking to you, and how you set that tone, how you respond in times of stress, how you stay kind of well-mannered, how you stay curious and open, but you can have critical conversations when people aren't performing. And that level of consistency, never underestimate how everything you do is analysed. And that we will, don't disrespect your personality. What makes my impact great is that's what's made me be a leader and actually deliver on a whole pile of legacy things in a lot of different sectors. But it took me a long time to be positive about that, because so much of the impact that the feedback that I would get is that I needed to tone it down. I needed to adjust for other people. I needed to change my style. It was always my fault. And you get really defensive. And when you're defensive, it's never positive. And so when you're a bit of an outlier and you're a little bit different, you've got to be able to be genuine to who you are. But I don't have a lot of truck with this authenticity word, because you can be authentically awful and authentically rude, or you can be authentically eccentric but not actually deliver what the client needs. I think if you can be considerate as a leader, then that it gives you that pause and that consideration for when you're just about to do whatever it is that you're about to do. Just factor in that pause. You know, quite often it's the things your parents used to say to you: count to 10 and think about it. And do I really need to say this? Like, when do you need to have the critical conversation? When do you not? And knowing who your safe people are. So sometimes you just need to be able to go and have an event, and you need to know who those people are, so you can let that out and have that, because that's your default. And then you can collect yourself and go and have the conversation that you need to have. But you know, it's a constant journey. And sometimes your leadership style, you know, everyone's got different language they use, or whichever model they like. But if you think about that opportunistic style where you just get in and you've got stuff to be done, those characteristic traits every business needs. And sometimes they're the traits you've got to be able to kind of wear. But depending on what role you're being asked to do at what time and where, then you need those kind of alchemy and strategies, bring people together, be the connector. But you've got to be able to pick and choose your time, but don't bury who you are as a person, because that's never going to work.
I do a lot of work with my clients around personality profiling, structure of teams and businesses. And, you know, if you are what I call an unconscious business owner or unconscious business leader, you'll often recruit and hire a whole bunch of mini-me's, which are people that are the same as you, because you're like, oh, you're awesome, you're just like me.
Come join me. I'm comfortable talking to you. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things. You need to surround yourself with people who make you uncomfortable.
100%.
And if you can't get used to being uncomfortable, then you probably, you know, you're not going to survive in a rapidly changing, accelerating world, because all the things that you think are solid no longer are. I think the set of assumptions that we're approaching our industry with probably don't hold true.
So before I jump onto the next sort of line of questioning and train of thought around, you know, the state of the industry and where you think things are going this year, I just want to wrap up that piece around whether we call it leadership. I just think that it's so important at the moment to have that level of self-awareness. And it's not only awareness of yourself, I think it starts with you in terms of your awareness of your personality strengths, your personality, whether it's your profile, but what motivates you, what demotivates you, what you're really good at, what you're not so good at, and then extending that to the team and the people around you in terms of, you know, recognizing that your personality style, the way that comes natural to you, you know, might rub someone else the wrong way. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong there. It just means that there's a potential clash, so that you then as the leader need to tailor your approach to get the best out of that outcome. And that's really that self-awareness piece that we're talking about. You know, awareness of you, awareness of your leadership style, awareness of your team, and then extending that self-awareness into what's the best outcome for the situation? How do I get the best outcome? And do I need to tailor my approach or my natural approach to get that best outcome? What are your views on that?
I think everything you've said's true, and that's correct. I think it's a little bit like everyone's a leader. At the end of the day, if you're in a team, you're leading something. You are responsible or accountable for some part of that. It's a bit like when people talk about, the marketing team will do that. I'm like, well, if you're in consulting or you're delivering, or if you're in the service-based industry, every single person's a marketer. And if you're not doing your job. And leadership's a bit the same. It's seen as, and I think the literature's failed us for decades, it's seen as this thing that you read a book and you pick up and you do it, and then you're a leader and it's fine. And, you know, the nature-nurture debate of leaders. Fundamentally, there's just you have a responsibility and your accountability, and how you go about taking the people that you're responsible for and the outcome that you're responsible for achieving, and how you go about doing that in an open, transparent way. There's not enough empathy. Our industry is full of the stereotypical alpha male. and they are seen as they get the job done. But how do they get the job done, and what the cost is of that for culture and people along the way? We don't have enough diversity in our industry. We hire really similar people. We ask for really similar specs. And that's not just diversity of gender, which is horrendous in our industry, but it's also race, backgrounds. So many of the big firms hire out of the same stream of private schools, first class honours, sandstone universities. Where is the diversity from any of that? You know, if someone has come up out of a poor socioeconomic background, they might have had, you know, been working 3 jobs while they're at university, and they've come through, you know, they are going to give your company such a huge, big remit of all sorts of brilliance and hard work and tenacity. And yet we kind of follow these really similar streams, which I don't think help us. And we need more courage, you know, fundamentally, the courage to truly collaborate, to think about change, to do things differently, to be a bit vulnerable. A word that I used, I did a 360 with a company where, and it was a brand 360, not just a leadership 360. We do lots of, but you know, what were the perceptions of me? Trying to unpack perception versus reality. And the spectrum of stuff in that was amazing. And it was a confronting thing to do. But it was a really positive thing. There was so much great feedback from that. That was both, and nearly everyone approached it in a way to provide genuine, this is amazing how you do this, but this is what happens when you do it this way. And the generosity of people to really give that positive feedback. So the ability to do those sorts of things, because quite often, you know, we all approach a situation with a whole bunch of assumptions and biases, and we don't see ourselves the way other people see us. And so using those tools and being really genuine in wanting to know and being able to take criticism, and it should be given politely, it isn't always done that way, but being able to take criticism and go, actually, I'm going to learn from that. What does that mean for me? And acting on that.
It's the ego piece, isn't it? It's really to be. And I love to your point about everyone's a leader. 100% agree. Everyone has the opportunity to lead in their own right, regardless of whether they have that title.
I know plenty of people with big titles and they're not leaders.
Exactly. 100% agree. It's the ego piece and it's the humility piece in terms of being able to be self-aware and conscious enough to check your ego at the door when you're getting feedback, or even to just be open to other ways of doing things or people's different viewpoints. And I love your description about our industry and where it's sort of heading, and it could be so much better if we allowed those other more diverse viewpoints in. And it's always, you know, it's that sort of saying about, you know, what got us to where we are won't get us to where we want to be going, but we have to be willing to do things differently and hire those individuals that have different backgrounds, different upbringings, so they bring that hunger to the workforce. But it is that ego piece and being able to willingly see feedback as an opportunity to grow, not an attack on your ego. And I think that's such a big point. And
it is a big self-growth journey. And people do self-growth both at home or in the workplace. But, you know, if you're not on that journey, we all need to grow and change. And there's all sorts of different things that we deal with at different times in our lives. And you have to consciously look at that self-growth in the same way as you look at your physical health or your, you know, it is essentially your mental health. It's the best person that you can be, and that's a really continuous journey. I think the other thing leaders need to really be is curious. You need to understand what is going on geopolitically. You need to have a sense of what is happening in other industries, what is happening across sectors that you're not involved in. And so surround yourself with mentors and people that work outside of your spheres is really, really important. I think the other thing with our industry is we overcomplicate it. At the end of the day, infrastructure is a knowledge-based industry. Whether you're building the very best bridge, you're designing a road, you're getting a community to accept a new project, or you're designing a collaborative contract. On that whole ecosystem of broad church of infrastructure, the common factor is that we are renting out parts of our brain to a client on an hourly fee. That's the simple model. And you can do that under the auspices of a 200,000 person global brand or under your own freelance model. And there's every spectrum in between. But at the end of the day, we're relationship based. And I think clients are, the systems and processes have not caught up with how new we could be in all sorts of different models, and bringing the right people into the table across a range of things. So we're still very company orientated, but the company and the brand and what that brings, if it's not purpose driven, if you're not adding value under that brand, then the great kind of resignation, you know, we're seeing so many kind of one person bands pop up, or two or three. Like, it's a real trend across industry. The processes, the litigation, the risk, etc. at the moment hasn't quite caught up, but we all know we need to do it differently. And so as a company and as a leader, if you can't attract the best talent, that will be your fundamental issue. And while we've got the skills and capacity shortages that we do, that's a global issue. You know, Fortress Australia has made it difficult to bring in a whole pile of international people. But we've also got a whole pile of young people going, I don't want to work the way you people. I don't want to work 7 days a week, 15 hours a day. Like, that's not what I want to do. And so if you don't want that great resignation to actually go into the gig economy, and although I'd say the gig economy is moving into our sector as well, but there's lots of different jobs that will come up. Every new technology, it takes about a decade, but it creates double the amount of jobs. And so there are a whole pile of jobs in our industry that won't exist at all in 10 years' time. They can be done by machines, but there will be all sorts of new jobs. And most of those jobs are in what we currently derogatively call, I think I just mispronounced that word, but you know what I mean?
It's okay.
Soft skills.
Yes.
They're not soft skills. Soft skills are the skills that are human-based, the skills that machines can't do. You know, you can run all the data, but if you don't know what the data means, you can't see the pattern and you can't analyze it to actually solve a problem or explain to a client that if you pull that lever, these are the consequences and how does that work through? Or if you can't tell a story, then, you know, you're not going to survive in that world. So we've got to stop calling them soft skills, and we need to start building them across our industry far more, because it will make better engineers of people. It will make better people of people. And those generalist skills are what will make a difference to your teams.
So glad you brought that up, because I mean, that's fundamentally what I do and why I started my business, because I agree, like we invest so much time, effort, and energy in training around the technical elements, and I 100% agree, technical elements, you need to understand and know the fundamentals. But you're right, like in 10 years' time, a lot of those technical aspects will be run by machines. I saw a thing on LinkedIn yesterday about how you can plug into a program now and it just builds the entire steel framework, including sizes and beam elements, in 5 minutes or something like that, and pulls out all the members. Like, that's 2 days work for a structural engineer that now programs are doing in 5 minutes. So that's
been the case in other industries for a long time. It's just been more difficult in the horizontal land, but it's getting less difficult.
Yeah.
But it's not an either or. We have these really mutually exclusive conversations. Well, you have to have the technical skills. It's like, yeah, you do. There's a foundation, but that technical person might not be the best person to lead this team, or they might be because they are on a growth journey or they're in that space. Like, it's horses for courses as well. And you'll always need the human element, and there'll always be problems that are really difficult to solve in the engineering world. And how you marry that and where you think those different patterns are going. But from a Queensland perspective, you know, from a global perspective, there has never been a better time to be in infrastructure. And so there are elements that will be automated, but there are huge amounts of work that are not going to be automated. So, you know, in Queensland, we are on the world stage, both in terms of the 2032 Olympics and everything that brings, both commercially and culturally. It places us on the world stage. It places us as, at that time, will be the main capital city with everyone's focus on it. We need to start looking north to Asia and that role, and not over our shoulder to the south. And in terms of our natural ingredients, our natural resources, our critical minerals, how much water we've got up north, what we can do to not only kind of export the raw materials, but actually shift into the research and the development and the manufacturing of, green steel, for example. There are lots of opportunities for us, and Queensland has every single ingredient needed across biomedicine, technology, space, defence, rockets, agribusiness, and all of those businesses need infrastructure. Infrastructure by its very name, infra, it's the spaces in between. It is our job to connect people and industry, and it's just exciting and extraordinary opportunities in Queensland.
It is, and I guess that leads into that next question, like your like, what are your views on this year, but also, I mean, we're obviously 2032's, 10 years away. Where do you think the industry is going to go? Like, what are the opportunities that are going to emerge over this next little phase for businesses that are in the infrastructure space? Super busy? Do you reckon it'll drop off? Or, yeah, what are your views?
There's always cycles. So, and, it's a big sector.
Yep.
So it'll be different kind of cycles and timing for different pieces. Public infrastructure spend will only get bigger. I'm not a big fan of the social infrastructure. At the end of the day, it started getting called social because they're bringing in PPPs, etc. But a hospital and a school are quite different versus a water pipeline or public infrastructure. There is so much spend in schools, hospitals, correctional, road, rail. In the Queensland context, a lot of infrastructure sits under the government banner. But from a private sector, the amount of moving forward in resources, the critical minerals, energy, water, transgrid, and then there's all of the private stuff that's happening in manufacturing, etc. There's a real shift now, fundamentally, finally, towards understanding that we are delivering infrastructure for people. So precinct and place and companies that can get their act together around how you actually sell that conversation around, what's called cities or placemaking, or, everyone's got a different way of how they're trying to attract that market. But every client really wants to understand how you bring land use planning, transport planning, this overarching ecosystem approach. I think one of the critical things in Queensland is how do we unite the public sector and the private sector? There's lots of opportunity where some of this public infrastructure could be delivered by the private sector, enabling government to invest in other areas. I think the Games is transformational, obviously. Big global city, it will transform what Brisbane and Southeast Queensland looks like, but that is not an SEQ versus the rest conversation. If your major region in your city is growing, your capital, then the whole of the state is growing. There are some big issues, though, around climate change. How do we respond to that? What will that mean for water security? And what regions have the right characteristics for this new green economy opportunities? Which ones don't? And how do we have that really honest conversation around the kind of winners and losers of different areas? Because we could have mass population migration to SEQ because they don't have any water in certain regions. So having that holistic view around the opportunities and the challenges and how we bring them together. So, and infrastructure is glue to every single one of those conversations. So there's huge amounts of work. It's the smart businesses that bring the best talent and have this mindset to think outside of the delivery of one single project that will start to be able to be vertically integrated, and there'll be more opportunities for that. I do think government need to adapt their processes to have more flexibility of who can come in. There's a lot of people and new businesses and companies that come from huge amounts of experience that are locked out of the market. The pre-quals are very prescriptive, insurance issues, that you need to have experience under your corporate banner and that the individual experience is not counted. So there's levers that are allowing for these new innovative models to come up. But the pipeline of work it's only getting bigger, and it's both private and public sector. But I think it is patchy in terms of the type of business you are and how easy it is to get into the train, because in the same way as we're all busy doing, clients get really busy doing, and they default to the people that they've always used. So how you pitch something really different and actually get a foot in the door, I think, is harder at the moment because everybody is busy.
What do you, yeah, that's super interesting. And I guess in terms of like, if you are a business leader, business owner, and you are looking to either get into infrastructure or get more work in infrastructure, like what do you think these companies need now in terms of leadership? Like, how do you go about strategically positioning yourself to make the most of this infrastructure and the insane amount of work that's coming? Like, what do you think are the core leadership skills or traits required to win?
Well, you've got to be able to sell. You've got to be able to get through the door and be personable. You've got to think about the problem that clients are trying to solve. So there's no point knocking on the door going, I'm amazing and I've assembled these amazing people and where you should give us work. What's the problem and what a unique, aspect are you bringing to the table? Why should they hire you? And if they don't know you, what's the ways around getting to know them? So how are you getting involved? How are you making connections? Because if your first connection is essentially transactional, we're a new business and you should give it to us, you're unlikely to be successful. Yep. So having those broader networks, those connections, getting involved in things that, aren't necessarily going to give you a return straight away. So, many members of the Infrastructure Association of Queensland, they join for legacy. They're like, we're busy, we're crazy busy. I don't want any of that BD. We want to help you create a vision around infrastructure. We want to solve some of these issues. We want to support the emerging professionals and make sure that we're supporting them and we're supporting our emerging professionals, and you've got this great network and they can join. And also working on initiatives. We do lots of partnerships with initiatives where we have smart companies and members that get involved and they give unbillable time because they know that will build rapport and they'll build those relationships and they'll spend their time. IAQ is one method for doing that, but there's lots of other ones. And I think, especially in Queensland, but a national context in Australia, First Nations and how we actually truly provide a proper voice in infrastructure decision making and in design and being respectful for country. And so engaging yourself in areas where you know that we could be doing better and find ways of doing better, because it's a whole other way of telling the story and actually giving, making a difference, which actually for many clients, they go, wow, that was a big problem and that's important to me. And now I actually want to have a conversation with you. But you need to get out and meet people and have the right conversations and be active listeners. Our industry is full of people that like to tell you how fabulous they are, but they're not necessarily listening to clients' problems. I just had a client the other day where I had introduced some people to them and, they're doing some work and that's great. And then she was saying, they'd been badgering me for a meeting, even though I'd set it up. We had a meeting and they didn't listen to a word I said. And so you still get a lot of this kind of, we're rapidly doing the problem and we've got this and we'll own the whiteboard, but just the spend the time listening. And it might take you 2 years having a meeting with someone who you think, I'm never going to make a deal with this person, but just put that out of your head. You're actually just learning about their problems. That will help you more broadly. You're building a relationship with them. There might be something that you can help, and be an interconnector, be a spanner. I can't really help you with that, but I know this person who can, and I think you should get to meet them. And then you've added value, even though it's not necessarily value for your business, but reciprocity is true. Like, giving is where you get back. And I think that if you're trying to get into an industry, thinking about how you do it differently and but we've all got overheads, and how you start and how you do that, it's incredibly stressful. So I'm not suggesting it's all kumbaya, but there's lots of different ways to brand yourself. And those ways will also help you attract talent, because if you don't have the great talent, then you're not going to grow. Yeah,
you can't deliver on the promises that you've made in the sell phase.
And match your client, do a lot of research about your clients, understand them. Some clients, there might be a whole pile of work there, but it might not be the right work for you. It might not provide you reasonable profit. It might not be the place to grow. And if you're a $20 million business, you might not want to be a $100 million business. How do you innovatively stay a $20 million business in a way where you're not in the growth cycle and the mouse wheel of our industry, which is really hard to jump off?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to jump off that mouse wheel. But guess what? You start a whole new conversation and you take people with you and you carve out. And that comes back to that whole piece you started with, the strategic headspace.
Yes. And it really comes down to like understanding your client's world, stopping, pausing, not approaching the conversation or the discussion from a viewpoint of this is how it's always been done, therefore that's how it's always going to be done. Actually understanding your client's world, their values, what they really need help with. I love what you said around listening, and then actually tailoring your approach, your discussion, your everything to that particular client to show them that you actually care about them, their world, the outcomes they want on their project. And over time, that approach builds a relationship for life.
Absolutely, completely agree. And for the bigger companies, this isn't just about SMEs. Work together. I've been a client for a long time. I don't know how many times companies would come to me and I'd hear from their maritime team, and then I might hear from their transport planning team, and then 2 weeks later I'd hear from their environment team. Clients are really, really busy, and they don't want you to just come and solve one small or tell them one small thing. They want to understand how they're going to solve this bigger picture. And so the benefit of big companies is that you can bring all of these smarts together in a really integrated way. And so don't let your business models get in the way of true collaboration, because that's what your clients are looking for. And that's why they'll pay for the big brands and the big outcomes, because you can deliver all of that value. But the operating models and the KPIs sometimes don't necessarily incentivize true collaboration.
Totally agree. Priscilla, I've got one final question for you, and I haven't actually prepared you for this, but that's okay.
Well, you haven't prepared me for any of them. You've gone off script the whole thing, but that's okay.
Sorry. So, with all the knowledge and all the things that you've amassed over the course of your career, and the things that you now know lead to success, and the things that now lead to not success and learnings, that sort of thing. Say you're sitting down with a 10-year younger version of yourself. What advice would you give? 20. Okay, 20. What advice would you give the younger version of yourself in terms of career and life?
I think one of them would be unpack who's giving you feedback and what their rationale is for giving you that feedback. So who truly should you listen to in those 360s, and who is not giving you feedback from a place of goodwill? I've spent an awful lot of time trying to please people that I really didn't need to, and probably shouldn't have, and would have got there a lot faster. So being conscious of where people are coming from. Be proud of who you are and the skills and your difference. If you're a different player, then that's what we need in the world, and do that. And be really conscious of your consistency and your impact. I can still default to being a pretty brusque, abrupt, like, let's just go. I go at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I'm not always respectful for other people's paces. And that's a default behavior that I still continue to do and regret. And so just be really conscious that, be kind to yourself, carve out that time, and that it's a continual learning process. You don't suddenly go, oh, I'm the perfect human now. Done. To be a good person, you're constantly learning, and you have good days and bad days, and just be the best you can be. And when you do make a mistake with your team, own it and apologize.
Amazing. Priscilla, thank you so much for agreeing to catch up. I apologise. I did go off script a fair bit there.
All right. Might not be. There might be nothing useful for you to use. You'll see.
No, it was amazing. Absolutely loved the conversation. Where can people follow along in your journey and connect with you?
I am on LinkedIn. I'm a terrible person for using it, and a lot of my work is non-disclosure. So, but from an IAQ perspective, you can find me on the website. Very easy to find. And from a contribute consulting point of view, I'm a little bit hidden, but you can always access me on LinkedIn or IAQ. Pretty approachable person.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you. I've loved our convo. Didn't matter if it went off script. It was awesome. So thanks for agreeing to catch up.
Oh, thanks, Josh. It was great to catch up. It's always lovely to hear from you and have a chance to chat, and know your career is soaring with your learnings and lessons. And I meet many people across the industry that you've touched and helped along the way. So you're having an impact, which is great.
Oh, amazing. Thank you.